Welcome to Hochoka Podcast.
Hello, Mataki AP. Welcome to Hochoka here at the center of St. Joseph's Indian Schools campus. I'm Scott Wooster, today's Hochoka host. We're glad you've joined our circle to hear from Maka Black Elk, Executive Director of Truth and Healing at Red Cloud Indian School. Maka has a rich spirituality, at once fully Lakota and deeply Catholic. So Maka, it's good to have you back in the studio here. I'm looking forward to our talk.
Yeah, good to be here. Thanks for having me.
Excellent. So you grew up in a household that was, my understanding was staunch traditionalist, Lakota, basically upbringing, and also devout Catholic. How has that influenced the faith life that you yourself live out today?
Yes, my parents were of two different faith traditions. Initially, my father was a devout Catholic. In fact, before he married my mother, he was at one point in training for information to become a priest. He was a Benedictine monk. And then my mother grew up very deeply traditional in Lakota spirituality and practice and followed that tradition all of her life. And so I grew up going to Sundance every summer that our family held, Sweat Lodge, multiple times a month, all throughout the year. All the sacred rites we did and practiced in our household. And then I would go to Mass every Sunday with my father and was, baptized and confirmed and did First Communion, etc. So I grew up in a household that was full of spirituality, full of these deep faith practices that, when you're a child, you don't always appreciate fully. But for me, it was certainly just normal, and it's what life was. I never truly questioned that there could ever be a conflict between those two things. It wasn't until I became a little bit older when I started to hear and recognize that, there's some conflict here, and that was something I had just personally not experienced, and it hadn't occurred to me until other people pointed out different parts and of that historical conflict, or just the different ideas that might be involved in those spiritual faith traditions. And those two faith traditions continue to be my what influenced me today.
Yeah. How fortunate to be a kid and have those two things and not realize that there was a conflict. That's a pretty special thing to have.
Yeah. It was, I think, growing up, again, just something that we did, right? Something that I did with my parents and just was a part of our cultural background. When I was maybe 9 years old is when sort of the distinction or sort of conflict begin to sort of appear for the first time. I think I was 9 years old when I realized that my mom never went with my dad and I to Mass on Sundays. And I think my childhood mind has sort of explained it away as, well, of course she can't come. She has to make breakfast, so that's there when we get back, or something like that. Yeah. But, after a while I was like, no, that's not always the reason. And that's, not clearly not the case. So I asked her, Mom, how come you and Dad don't come with how come you don't come with Dad and I to Mass? And she was like, I think in the middle of sewing. And she didn't even stop what she was doing. And she said, well, it's just because I don't believe in that. And it's entirely incompatible with being Lakota. And I was a little bit taken aback. And I said, well, what do you mean? And she stopped what she was doing and gave me her full attention. And she said, well, let me put it this way. Everything you need to know about people and what they believe in, you can turn to their creation stories to figure that out. And so what is the creation story of Catholicism? And I said, the story of Adam and Eve. And she said, yes. And what's the creation story for the Lakota? And I said, the emergence story. And we came from the Mother Earth. And she said, yeah. And so what do those two stories teach us about our world and what we believe in? And I sort of thought about it. And she's like, well, let me tell you. She's like, in the Lakota tradition, right? Earth is our mother, and this is a place that we are we have to take care of, and all of creation is our relatives, and that's what our story teaches us. And she said, in the Catholic story, earth is a place of banishment, and man has to dominate the earth, and woman is subservient to him. And she said, and so that's all you really need to know to see how totally incompatible they are. And just went right back to sewing. And I was sort of left there as if this bomb had dropped.
Right, yeah.
And really was sort of floored and had a little mini identity crisis at 9 years old. And I went to my dad, and I said, Dad, this is what Mom said, and explained everything to him and what she had talked about. And he gave me this very sort of deep sigh. And he said, okay, well, your mom's not wrong, but what she is talking about is culture, and culture is a human creation, and what's eternal is God, and we are always striving as humans to be closer to that, and achieve that in all of our traditions, including Lakota and Catholic. And that was, I think, a poignant moment for me. That I'll always remember this exchange I had with the two of them at this time, because what my father sort of laid out for me was how he was able to be both Lakota and Catholic, because he also then, after marrying my mother, became a practitioner of both. Mm-hmm. And he was deeply rooted in both of those spiritual traditions and walked those two, I think, every day with great ability and without any sort of internal conflict. And I think he was able to parse out the ways in which our faith in God is universal, mm-hmm. and where culture can sometimes get in the way of that, and was able to navigate that for himself very well. And I think that's what I learned from him.
And that he was the model for you for incorporating both, which is nice.
Yeah.
I thought you were going to tell me that they neither one of them would accept any part of the other, but yet they expected you to incorporate both, which I think would be a really interesting concept. But yeah, what a way to learn, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. In the book, The Sacred Pipe, so Black Elk states, without qualification, something to this effect, that I believe in Christ, but all should know the greatness and truth of Lakota tradition in bringing peace upon the earth, within men and the whole of creation. And how does that piece resonate with your faith experience?
Very deeply. I think one of the beautiful things about Lakota spirituality and tradition is the emphasis on relationship, and the emphasis on relationship not only with each other as human beings, but also with the rest of creation, both certainly the animals that make up our environment, but also our plant life and our waters and our air, and this incredible and just powerful recognition in the sacredness of all things. Mm-hmm. I think that's something that the Catholic Church can learn a great deal from, and I think also believes in. But of course, I think we talk about culture, right? Mm-hmm. It is the case that, of course, the Catholic faith in the United States has its origin, right, in the Roman Catholic Church in Italy and Rome, which is a particular European faith, right? That's a cultural expression that stems, its way through to us today in the United States. And in that cultural tradition, I mean, I think of one example actually in our school. At Red Cloud, we're a Catholic school, but we teach Lakota and Catholic spirituality. Mm-hmm. And one of our parents came to us because in our elementary curriculum, there was a little question that they gave to the children that showed little pictures of, little places like a park or a library, or there was a church, and some fourth option. And the question was was posed to the children in this curriculum was where is God? And she's like, I get that you're probably trying to say that the answer is the church, but I don't even think Catholics believe that it's just in the church. And certainly it's not what Lakota people believe. So mm-hmm. I just always find that to be a powerful example of, we can have these sort of cultural influences that say, oh, God is only here and this is where you're supposed to go. But Lakota spirituality really calls us to believe, I think, more strongly in that belief of God in all things. And that's what I think really empowers my faith, and where I certainly see a strong tie to Lakota tradition, Lakota spiritual thinking, is that deep connection to all of creation.
So some folks who are both Lakota and Catholic, they speak of carrying the chanupa in one hand, and they speak of carrying the Bible in the other hand. And my understanding is you have thoughts on that you might express that faith perspective just a little bit differently.
Yeah, I appreciate when Lakota people who are Catholic or Christian talk about this idea of carrying the pipe in one hand and the Bible in the other. I know what they mean, and I hear what they're saying. I think where I quibble with that is it sets up this binary that I think is sometimes a little bit harmful, actually, when it comes to our faith, our different faith practices, and even just that relationship building that we need to have between those different faith traditions. Yes, these are two different faith traditions that have rich histories and beautiful forms of prayer. But at times when we sort of fall into that binary of pipe in one hand, Bible in the other, I think it sometimes creates this compartmentalization of here's one God and then here's another God. And I just, do these things sort of differently. I find it just really important and powerful to think about the ways in which I carry both the pipe and the Bible, just embracing them together, cradling them both as one. There's a story that I heard from another Native Catholic person who was talking about his grandfather, who they're from another tribe. One of their traditions is to go walk to the river in the morning and sort of pray toward the morning star, and do that while walking to collect water that morning. And they would do so once they became, after years of being also Catholic as well, they would do that walk and also do the rosary while doing it. And I think to me, that's always been a powerful image just for me of the ways in which traditions can become enriched by Catholic spirituality and how Catholic spirituality can become enriched by Native tradition. And for me, that's just always something that I felt the more we can embrace those things as being one, the more I think we can live in a world where those two things don't have to be in conflict. I think that binary sort of helps keep that perceived conflict alive.
Yep. So the visual with that is not the Bible in one hand, not the chanupa in the other hand, but both in the cradle, or as you said, you just hold them to yourself in the center. It's nice. For those who understand themselves to be fully Catholic, how can an appreciation of indigenous thought, traditional thought, and spirit enrich, broaden, and even complement their faith?
Yeah, I think one of the things that's really important to me, because I think of myself as fully Catholic, right?
Right.
Is that these other traditions, these other faith traditions that are out there, need not be seen as a threat of any kind. That the traditions and prayers in our Catholic faith are beautiful and powerful, and that they can also be enriched by other forms of prayer, and other forms of thinking, or other just ways of thinking or approaching. One of the things that I have always found to be very powerful is, in Lakota spirituality, in Lakota language, actually, the word to pray, chekiayo, right, has a relationship with the word to lament or to cry. They're in the same family, and I have always felt that to be just an important recognition that prayer is a way of sort of crying out to God, right? And I think sometimes in our Catholic faith, right, prayer is something that we do. It's something that is sort of it can get routine, right? We have these canned prayers that we all know, and and that's important, and those prayers are beautiful. But to think of prayer as crying out to God, that's a different emotion than I think what sometimes our simple prayers are, to truly sort of sit in a space of lament. I think that takes us to the core of the passion, even of Christ's passion. And so to just even think about that, and think about the ways in which other ways of thinking and other ways of approaching our faith traditions just really help us maybe even become closer to God.
I like that. I like the way you see the word chekiayo. I think that's important, and a couple other words that strike me as being in line with that I'm struck by as you're talking about that are omakiayo, to help me, Creator. You look to the Creator for help. Or one of my favorites is onshimalayo, right? Pity me, Creator, and you're calling out in a way to ask for that help. In a true, it really is a true spiritual quest to have that courage, which I think you have, to be able to step back and take that wider perspective of both of those things. Just give me your thoughts on that. You've been able to do that, and just in talking to you, I get that perspective. What are your thoughts on that? How have you been able to do that?
Yeah, I think it goes back to what I said earlier about trying to just question the different moments in my life where the question of whether being Catholic or being Lakota has been put to me in this way that's binary. That means I have to choose one at the expense of the other. That I have to choose being Lakota, and that means somehow minimizing or even harming my Catholic faith, or that choosing to be Catholic at once minimizes or harms my Lakota identity. That trap, I think, is so dangerous, and I think it's a trap that we find ourselves in all the time. Certainly as a Native person, but it's a trap that I think is actually takes us further from God, takes us further from our Creator, and I think that's an important thing for all people to sort of look at, right? Like, what are the ways in which we limit even just our own perceptions of Catholicism, and make it something that's small and exclusive, and something that we say people out there, that there are people who shouldn't or can't access that. And I think that's a trap that Catholics can sometimes find themselves in. So to me, I try to question the moments when I am placed, either by myself, because I sometimes do it, or by others, in this binary position that says I have to choose one or the other, and one of these things has to lose, because I don't believe that that's true, and I don't believe it should be true.
Excellent. Last question today. I'm going to cast you in the role of the spiritual director, and what I'd like you to give our viewers is an idea of what reading or what practices you think might enrich or strengthen their relationship to the Creator.
Well, that's a good question. I am not a spiritual director, and certainly I'm always even trying to spiritually direct myself. But I certainly, of course, in light of this conversation, can't recommend enough for folks who haven't. Please read Black Elk Speaks and read more about Black Elk himself and his faith and his spirituality, and what Lakota spirituality teaches us and talks about. I'd also recommend The Universal Christ by Richard Rohr. I think that's a helpful tool for Catholics, especially to think about Christ in all things, and how that that way of thinking can help us deepen that relationship. And for myself, in terms of practice, I come from the Jesuit tradition in terms of prayer and my own education. And so I find myself often drawn to imaginative prayer. So just putting yourself in the space, imagining yourself exactly where your prayer takes you, or even just spending time literally with Christ in your mind and sitting with him, talking with him. I think those are just powerful things to help ground you, and those are things that I try and do in my own life.
And they work for you.
Yes, they often do.
Yeah, excellent.
When I do them.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, wonderful. So, thanks once again, Maka, for being here today. It's nice to have you and Ho-Choka here with us.
Thank you.
And I'd like to thank you all for joining us here in Ho-Choka at the center of St. Joseph's Indian School campus, where we talk about issues that are central to Native American education today. Until the next time, stay centered.